Well, good day, everyone. Welcome to another edition of USHL in Focus. Excited to be joined by the director of NHL Central Scouting today, Dan Marr. Dan, I know you're a busy fellow, so appreciate you taking some time out of your day to join
No,
us today.
my pleasure, Paul.
So 2 weeks ago, the NHL Central Scouting came up with their mid-year rankings. You do three rankings during the course of the year, your preliminary rankings in the fall, and then the mid-year ones, which, as I said, come out in January, and then you'll do another final ranking at the right before the NHL Draft takes place during the summer. And I want to talk a little bit about the process and how we ended up with this. Of course, excited uh, folks in the USHL with four of the top five players listed in the mid-year rankings with USHL ties, a couple former players and current player listed in the top five. So excited about that. I want to talk about the process, Dan, how you and your crew, it's not just you, you have an extensive network of scouts that work for it. Tell us about the process that you go through in determining these rankings and what exactly is the purpose of publishing these listings for everybody to watch.
Well, I think it's important to understand NHL Central Scouting is a service department for the 32 NHL clubs. So we provide them with these ranking lists, but we also have we're responsible to be the ecosystem of the information that they receive, all about players, leagues, schedules, suspensions, injuries, and we also administer the combine for them. So I have in total, there's 8 full-time North American scouts. We have a separate group that does our international list over in Europe. And we have a dozen regional scouts throughout North America. And at our meetings, it's where the full-time scouts will gather. And we first put an order to each area. So the OHL, Quebec, and the Western leagues, they all have their own area. We have the USHL, we have the NCAA, we put them all in an order. And then we just start, we have a meeting manager system, we call it, in our scouting system, where we start to populate the names on the big board. And once we populate them, we'll put a few names up, then we'll look at them to see how the order they came up. Then we start to have discussions. And the scout for the West is responsible for the order of the West, but he does listen to the opinions of the other scouts. So to work for Central Scouting, you have to park your ego at the door. You have to be able to arrive at a consensus. You have to kind of take it in. Okay, I have strong feelings for this player, but you want to be more right than you are wrong in this business. There's no science to it. And sometimes you just have to acknowledge, all right, maybe I like this player too much. Maybe I'm overrating them. Maybe I need to give a little bit more time to some of these other players. So it's a back and forth, push-pull situation where everyone has their individual list going into the meetings, their overall list, but it's always that group list at the very end, which ends up being the best list. You can go back and look at your own list, and you just see that, yeah, you know what, that's a better list looking at the group list. And the other thing to understand is that the NHL draft, like in reality, it's a brand. It's a brand of the NHL. It's a brand that's marketed and emphasized by all the leagues. Everyone wants to promote their players. We promote all the players. We're not. We really don't care how many come from each league. When all's said and done, I find out from the leagues that they have so many players on our ranking list. We just go with arm's length, open view of it. But we have a responsible professional core group, and we have 3 full-time staff in our office that put these lists together. But in order for the NHL to promote the draft, because let's face it, this is where we get our future stars from, it's our responsibility to put it out there just for the benefit of the fans and some of the media, just so that they know this is what the draft class is looking like. Because you're not going to see Pittsburgh or Boston or Toronto's list. Never happens. So it's kind of our job to promote it publicly for the benefit of the brand, the players, the leagues, and it's also for the benefit of the 32 clubs in the sense that our scouts cross over far more from league to league than some of the NHL club scouts do. A lot of them are a little bit more regionalized. They have one or two crossover, where all our scouts cross over. So we do have a pretty wide spectrum and view of the big picture for the draft. And the teams, one of the uses they take from our list, yes, it's interesting to see where people have them ranked, but they get to ask themselves the questions. So we have this player at this position in the top 5. Central Scouting has him in the 20. Why do you think that is? Or vice versa. Central Scouting really likes this player. We don't have him as high. And it's just to stimulate some questions and stimulate some discussions on the players. What we do for our final meetings, we put our rankings in order, and then we conduct a mock draft amongst ourselves. And it's surprising, like, we'll push and pull to put that list together, and somebody's pushed and this player's ended up in our second round, but then we go around and we're drafting, and he gets drafted in the 5th round. So that begs the question. And then we go back, we have some discussions there. So it's an impossible task to predict what 32 clubs are thinking going into the draft class. They all have their own philosophy, secret sauce that makes it work for them. So we don't try. Our list is put together on who we think has the best potential to play in the National Hockey League down the road. It's not because Team A is picking first, Team B is picking second, Team A needs a center, Team B needs a defenseman. We don't go down that path. We'd get our fingers slapped pretty quick if we tried to recommend what the NHL clubs do. We leave that to the media. And the fans have a lot of fun with the draft. They play GM and try and figure out what the teams need. So our list is just, it's used for many purposes like that there, but it's just a reference point more so than a guide.
Yeah, it is interesting, and of course, your group casts a wide net. You mentioned legion of scouts that you have working in Europe and North America, and of course, you do publish North American skaters. You talked about the difficulty in trying to compare. So there's the North American skaters list, North American goaltenders. Same thing with the European players. It is interesting. You talked about the public relations benefit of publishing this list. Obviously, the teams hold their information close to their vest, but the Central Scouting list wasn't always published either. The decision to go public with it and having an understanding of the residual benefit of doing that, Dan, do you recall the process that went through to decide to actually publish and come up with the current system?
I wasn't with the league at the time when a number of these changes were made, so I don't necessarily have the full history, but I can tell you, like, one of the first changes that I implemented when I came in was Central Scouting had only ranked first-time draft eligible players.
Okay.
Just 17, 18-year-olds. And I had just come from working with two NHL clubs, and the clubs, they take the best player available as long as they're draft eligible, regardless if they're 17, 18, or 19. So that was one of the first things that was changed to align our rankings with what the teams do. And I know in my first year, it's the first time a 19-year-old had ever been in the top prospects game. It doesn't happen that often, and it was one of the first times that the 19-year-olds were listed in the draft class. And when I joined the league, it was after the last lockout, to where the rules of the game changed, the speed factor influenced the game, and size became less relevant in the sense that it wasn't a prerequisite, it was more of a intangible. So it opened up the door for a whole wide array of players. I remember at my first combine, one of the New Jersey scouts came up and he said, I'm really glad you brought this player in because I hadn't known it was the first time a player under 6 feet had ever been to the combine.
Wow.
And so we changed along the way. And one of the first things I did was at the request of a name very familiar in the U.S. side in junior hockey was Jack Barzee, where
Mm-hmm.
we had Central Scouting had used like a U.S. East and U.S. West ranking system for their areas and groups. And Jack pushed, and it made sense to me. So like we put the USHL in their own specific area. We still have a U.S. East and a U.S. West, which comprises of the high schools and the prep schools and like North American League players and such. But we gave the USHL its own status, and I think when you do little measures like that and you promote players like that, it does help grow the game. It just gives it that stature to it and that status. And in my time, and I can recall from other times, just the way the list goes out, but the way the game is developed, and we take our lead from the clubs, what they want us, what they're looking for. You know, when you talk about, we did an interesting study where if you go, we went back 12 years, and the number of players drafted from the United States, just U.S. players, it's incrementally but steadily trending upward. Never once has it dipped, and it's trending upward in a way to where there's more U.S. players in the top 3 rounds than there were in the bottom 3 rounds, and those numbers continually increase and increase. And as a scout, one of the things that stands out for me is 12 years ago, you would go to a CHL game, and on every roster, there were a number of drafted NHL players. 12 years ago in the USHL, that wasn't the case. It was odd to have a drafted NHL prospect playing and developing in the league. Now you go back, we went back in the past 6 years. Now that trend is now you can go to CHL games where there are no players on a club that had been drafted by NHL teams. And, that's a little bit odd, but now practically every USHL club has drafted players in their lineup. And that just goes to show that it is a good development league. It is a good spot for these players. Some of them have to play a gap year before they go to the NCAA. But also what's been noticed, particularly for our group in the last few years, is the competitive caliber of the league continues to get better and better. So the USHL, it is one of the premier development leagues for a player to play in, much along the likes of what the CHL is. Like a player going to play in the USHL can develop just as good as any other league there is.
Yeah, and taking a look at this year's rankings, that would bear that out with 9 of the top 30 kids listed at mid-year having USHL ties, including current players. We're not talking necessarily about Max Celebrini, who played in Chicago last year, or Artyom Lashunov, who's at Michigan State but played in Green Bay last year. But Trevor Connolly at Tri-Cities, number 5. And you also have Cole Iserman, the National Team Development Program guy, Sasha Boisvert, Michael Hage, Camille Bednark, and Matt V. Gridden, all listed there. You're familiar with a lot of these players, but it appears like Max Celebrini's been on the radar, obviously, for a couple years now. And from what I saw on some of the comments that were made when the mid-year rankings out, and some came from you, Dan, where he cemented himself as the number 1 overall pick. It looks like heading into the final draft rankings in June.
Well, he's certainly the consensus number 1 at this point, and he's earned that. He's a special player, and he belongs in that special category because in every environment, every situation he goes in, he can excel. and that's hard to do as a 17-year-old. But I do have to tell you, Levshunov and Bouillon, they're going to make the conversation a lot more complicated by the final rankings. Levshunov might be the most NHL ready player in this draft class. Just the combination of the physical maturity and the composure, the way he plays the game, it's very impressive. And Z Bouillon, like, he doesn't know when to quit, when to stop. He just keeps going and going, and he's the consistency for a freshman on a championship team taking over as one of their top players. That's like truly impressive. And like, you know, he's given Macklin Celebrini a run on just in the points department as a defenseman. So like the conversation's going to be a lot longer at our final meetings, and I'm looking forward to it. But we're very careful about trying to make a statement saying that it's a lock for any one player.
Right. Understandable. And you talked about the fluctuation, what you might see on your draft rankings, and when it comes to the actual draft, there may be some deviation there. But one of the questions I did have for you was a kid like John Mustard in Waterloo, who was listed as a player to watch in the fall rankings. I assume he hadn't been seen a whole lot. He's a rookie in the USHL, but he made a major leap, as some kids do, to number 41, projected as a second or third round pick. And of course, the rank, I was interesting. I was in Detroit. I saw you walking around the rink at the Chipotle game, Dan. We had at the All-American game at USA Hockey here a couple weekends ago, and the draft rankings that came out the day before, and then John Mustard, who was listed at 41, ended up scoring the game winner in overtime. And so it seemed like you were justified, your crew was justified in what you were doing there with it. How does a player like John Mustard go from being a player to watch to, is it just as simple as he finally got seen by a couple of cross-checkers, or how does that work?
Well, going into the season, he was listed as a W just because we don't scout underages. But when our scouts are at games and an underage player pops that has a good game, we encourage them to write a report. And we do put a futures list together at the end of each year. And we had him on our futures list as a W because it came from our regional scout. He said, this is a guy that we need to watch. Coming from high school, we'll have to see how he does next year. And he was good at the start because we moved him up to a C fairly quickly, and then when we found out he would be in Waterloo, and like Waterloo is a very strong organization, but we know from it's just their tradition in a way. You have to earn your position and earn your role on the team there. And like no hot shots come in there and get a free ride or get you have to earn it. And like, so it's a credit to him to what he's been able to accomplish because he's earned it playing in Waterloo and being developed there. We look at a couple of things here. As a true first-year player, it's a big jump to come in and have success on a consistent basis. And this is what he's starting to show us. He's becoming more and more consistent. He's a month shy of not even being eligible for the draft, and he has actually had a good offseason where he got some strength, and sometimes at that age the strength leads to some additional confidence, and we saw that confidence on full display at the prospect game. So he's like, right now we have on our list, he's a B2, B second round consideration, right. And he's just trending in the right direction. And this is where this year in particular, this list, there's going to be not subtle changes, but a lot of changes on our final ranking. I think it's going to be like, an example, the 20 to 30 range. The names might be the same, but there's going to be significant change in the order. Right. And I think that's going to go through for the top 50 to 60 names in this draft class, which it's a good thing. I get asked by agents, if there was a perceived drop in their players' ranking. And I said, it's not that they've dropped; they're still a talent. But just other guys have gone by them because they've developed. They're having better years. They're showing us that they've got a little bit more potential. Doesn't mean that your player is not going to get drafted, not going to play, not going to be a first rounder. But just sometimes players go by them, and this year's it's been one of those surprising years. We knew Lev Shunov was going to be good. We just didn't know he was going to come in and be that consistently good, game in and game out. Like, you go to Michigan State and Denver games now, you're apt to see 40 to 50 NHL personnel at those games.
Right. Well, Dan, this has been extremely interesting. Really appreciate you taking your time to visit with us today, and looking forward to the final rankings in April, and hopefully get a chance to see you in Vegas in June. Okay.
Well, take care now.
Thanks very much.